If you have a scary story you want to send to the channel, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. My brother, Alfredo, and I planned a road trip from Oklahoma to Mexico. Our father was actually born in Mexico and moved to the US for a chance at a better life. There, he met our mother and they moved to Oklahoma together, where they had us and our little sister, Monica. My father was an avid hunter and camper and just an all-around outdoorsy type. We both have wonderful memories together of us all camping, and even our boys' trips of the three of us hunting. In the early 2000s, my father passed away due to heart complications. We were all devastated as he really was the rock that held us all together. Truly a family man. But after we all took nearly a year to grieve and feel sorry for ourselves, our mom convinced us that it's not what our father would have wanted. We knew that we needed to move on for him, and that's precisely what we aimed to do. So, for the anniversary of his death, we decided to continue his tradition of our father-son trips and drive down to Mexico, in order to sprinkle some of his ashes in his hometown. Our planning was very meticulous. We knew what essentials to pack and what would just take up space. We took our camping gear, expecting to be sleeping under the stars, not in hotels, or at least in the back of the truck. We packed a cooler with simple foods to last us in between, as well as another cooler with water and our dad's favorite lemonade, our little splurge. We set out, looking forward to a few days away, a chance for us to heal and move on. The trip started out great. We made a few stops in between to sightsee or to rest. We had even gotten into Mexico with little hiccups on the way. We actually found the exact house that our dad used to live in. The people that lived there at the time of our trip even invited us in and told us about how they actually knew our grandfather, which was how they got the house. It was supposed to go to our father, but he agreed with his father to let the family have it, as they were in more need of it than he was. Just another show of how selfless our father was. We sprinkled some of his ashes there, and then we planned to go to his favorite fishing spot that he went to with his father. We stayed in Mexico an extra day just to experience it. We went a few times as kids, but it had been so long ago, and we hardly remembered everything and wanted to see it all as an adult. After our time in Mexico, we knew that we had to make our way back home. So we packed everything up and prepared to make the way back. We refilled some of our food and water, but they didn't have a lot of options for bottled water where we were at, so we grabbed what we could and said that we would fill up the next chance we could get. We had tossed our used bottles, not thinking about refilling them, so we were kicking ourselves for that. Anyways, we still had a good amount of supplies, so we thought we would be okay. But what we did not account for were truck problems that would severely throw a wrench into our plans. As we drove and talked, there was suddenly a loud popping sound and the check engine light kicked on. We could hear a weird gurgling sound, and we both looked at each other like, what the hell was that? We pulled over to the side of the road and opened the hood to see what happened. The only problem is, we weren't exactly mechanically inclined. Our dad tried to teach us some things, but of all the things he tried to get us to do, we just could not grasp the car thing. It just wasn't our thing, and I think he knew that, so he didn't push it much. We knew how to change oil, but that was about it. We looked under the hood and couldn't really see anything immediately wrong. Our initial thought was to drive it slowly with the hazards on to the next town and to call for a tow truck to the closest car shop. As mentioned, this was the early 2000s. Neither of us had cell phones, so we had no way of calling anyone. But when Alfredo went to try to start the truck, it wouldn't turn over at all. All we got was a weak, whirring sound and the lights kicking on. And that truck was not moving. We were still in Mexico, and the road we were on was pretty empty, previously only seeing 2 other cars on it. We both agreed that all we could do was wait for someone to pass and hopefully stop to help us. We just took it as a time to relax. We sat in the bed until we got too hot and then moved into the truck, thinking the shade would help some. However, it soon became too hot in there as well. So we treated it as another night and set up our tent in the field next to the road. We thought we could at least rest and eat, and if anything, maybe a cop would come by to tell us we couldn't stay there and we could get some help. But I guess that was just us being optimistic. There wasn't a single car that drove by that day or through the night, at least while we were awake. We ended up falling asleep without being disturbed once, and we woke up in the same situation that we were in. We considered walking, but we couldn't remember how far away the last stop was. We'd been driving for quite some time, and by foot, it was going to take even longer. We once again decided to wait it out, hoping that it was a fresh day and surely there would be at least one person. It had been hours, and still nobody was around. By midday, the temps had to be in the triple digits, and we had to stay hydrated with how much we were sweating. However, we didn't have a lot of water left. We had 4 bottles between both of us, and even portioning out how much we drank, it wasn't going to last long. We both had gone through a bottle each. We were using some of the ice and water from the food cooler to put on our face and skin to save the other one. I know that I was really feeling the effects already, but Alfredo seemed to really be affected. He told me that he was feeling sick, so I told him to lay down in the truck, keeping the wet shirt that he had on his head, and I hooked the small fan that was powered by the lighter port to blow on him. The truck wasn't moving anyways, so who really cared if we killed the battery? To my surprise and fear, there was one car that we saw coming from the distance. I stood behind the truck and waved my hand, but they didn't even slow down. They were going fast enough that I couldn't even make out who was driving. I was frustrated. I could understand not wanting to pick someone up, but why not just stop to ask what was wrong? If they could just pass it along to someone, a cop or anyone, it would help. But there we were. Another night with no help. Alfredo was in and out of sleep, but he was breathing really fast. I was worried about him. By the next morning, he wasn't really responsive, and I started to fear that he was dehydrated and/or having a heat stroke. I told him to drink his water, and my last bottle, just taking sips of the melted ice from our food cooler. I was the older brother, and I felt responsible for him. If we didn't see anyone that day, I knew that I was going to have to start walking to do something. In fact, I really didn't have much of a choice. I was going to have to start walking that day. Otherwise, we would be completely out of water, and then neither of us would be strong enough to go. But I was also worried about leaving Alfredo alone. I finally made the decision that I had to try to get help somehow. I filled up the empty bottles with the water from the food cooler, put them in the cooler, and put it next to Alfredo. I told him I was going to get help, and he didn't really respond. I was worried that I was running out of time. I started walking the direction that we had come from, and I was only an hour in, according to my watch, and I was already starting to regret it. I was feeling weak and dizzy, and my water was almost gone. I was scared and angry. We just wanted to have a good trip with our dad one last time, and we were still hindered. I stopped to sit on a boulder, trying to calm down, when I heard the rolling sound of wheels on gravel. I looked up and saw an old rickety truck heading in my direction. I was elated, but tried not to get my hopes up. It was possible that they wouldn't stop either, but as I weakly waved them over, they surprisingly did. It was an old man, wearing a cowboy hat and overalls with no shirt. He asked if I was alright, and I flatly told him no. I explained what happened, and he told me to hop in the back, and I didn't hesitate. He drove back to where Alfredo was, and I was just thankful for the man and the breeze as he drove. Once we were there, he told me to get my brother in the truck, and he looked at ours. He was hardly coherent at that point, and he was extremely hot to the touch. The man confirmed that he had a feeling that he knew what was wrong with it, but that it wasn't going to be a quick fix, so he agreed to take us into town. I quickly threw our camping gear into the back of the truck, not giving a damn about the stuff at that point. I just wanted my brother to be okay. The man drove us back to the town that we passed through, and with how long it took us, I don't think that I would have made that walk. The man said that he was actually planning on picking some things up from his sister a few towns over, and he almost didn't because of how hot it was that day. I was just incredibly thankful that he decided to go for whatever reason he did. Once there, I got Alfredo to a clinic who confirmed that he was severely dehydrated. We got fluids and electrolytes in him, and he was back to normal for the most part. Other than a migraine and being tired, he said. We stayed there a few more days, until we could get our truck towed and fixed. At least enough to just get us home. I couldn't thank that man enough for being so generous to us, and I even offered to pay him, but he refused. Thankfully, we were able to get home after that with little problems, and we made sure to have a full pack of water. Even if it was hot, it was better than no water. Looking back, the trip was still enjoyable. I was happy that we were able to get to Mexico with no issues to give our dad a proper send-off, and I feel as though that since he was with us, he was looking out for us that day too, and I will be forever grateful for the man that stopped. It was my last year of college, and I was burnt out and exhausted, but happy to finally be done. As a congratulatory gift, my boyfriend planned a road trip for the two of us and my best friend Cassidy, who I hadn't seen in a year due to my schoolwork. She flew down to meet us, and she stayed there for a day so she could look around, as she had never been to Georgia. The next day, we set off on our road trip back to Pennsylvania, where I grew up, where Cassidy was still living, as well as my parents. My boyfriend, Grant, seriously planned this all out for me, and I was ecstatic. We all piled into his little car, filling the trunk in the back seat next to Cassidy, and we were on our way. We were making great time, even with the frequent stops to take pictures and the bathroom breaks. Grant and I even swapped driving duties so he could stretch out. We stopped at a nice little diner in South Carolina. Cassidy convinced us to stop at an antique store in North Carolina, and ultimately I was glad that we did. Grant found an old game console from his childhood that we purchased, and he just looked so elated to find it. We decided to stay at a hotel in North Carolina for the night, since our excitement and energy was making us crash pretty hard. The hotel was fine, nothing too extravagant about it, but it was clean and in a nice area. We went to the free breakfast buffet that morning before leaving. I was in line right behind an older man. He looked like he was probably in his 70s. He was bald, with a very long gray beard, and wearing a pair of jeans and a blue and red flannel shirt, with a pair of sunglasses on his head. He asked me if I wanted the tongs for the hot dish that he was on, and I confirmed, so he handed them to me. Then, as I went to grab an apple from the covered fruit container at the end, he turned around and said, "Think fast," and stabbed my apple with one of those little drink swords. They had a container of them at the end to help pick up the waffles, I guess. When he did that, and he had this big grin on his face, it made me jump, and we both kind of laughed. He started apologizing and offered to take the apple and to get me a new one, but I thought it was hilarious. I would never have expected him to do that, and it was just lighthearted fun. I told him it was fine, but that I was keeping his sword now, and he said that was fair since it would be considered evidence. He told me to have a good day, and we both parted. I went to the table with Grant and Cassidy, and told them what had happened. Cassidy said that she thought she saw him when we came down, but Grant did not. I explained what happened, but when I went to point him out, he was already gone. It wasn't a big deal, though. I figured he just took his food back to his room. We got back on the road after filling our stomachs, ready for another great day. However, we did not fill up our tanks, so after a few hours, we had to stop for gas. Grant said that he needed to use the restroom, so I agreed to fill up as he went in and got us drinks as well. I finished fueling, and after we stretched, Cassidy and I got back in the car as we waited for Grant to come out, which he did shortly after. Grant then told us the guy working behind the counter told him about a small museum about the state that wasn't too far away from where we were, and asked if we wanted to go. I love learning about new places, especially ones that I've never been to, so I was up for it. We got to the museum and had a good time. There was nothing wrong with it, and we got a souvenir, but nothing too crazy going on. It wasn't until later that night that things started to get weird. I had to give a bit of a rundown of what happened so far on the trip, so the rest of this will make sense. We took the day a bit slower since we were still on time, and by the time we were in Virginia, it was pretty dark out. I was driving at that time and getting tired, but we were planning on stopping at the next exit that had hotels. When I started to get tired, I hyper-focus on my surroundings. I don't know if it's a way to prevent me from falling asleep or what, but it's what I do, and it's definitely helped. But as we drove and our chatter slowly died down, I focused on the surroundings outside. We were passing through a section of highway that was pretty empty. The road was pretty flat, and there were fields on both sides. Some kind of farm, it seemed. I saw a sign for the exit coming soon, so I started to slow down, preparing to get over, not wanting to miss my exit. As I started to slow down, I could see a dark figure in the distance to the right of us. As we got closer, I was able to make out the shape of a person. There was a person standing on the side of the highway, in the middle of the night. But the only thing is, there wasn't a car in sight. There wasn't one on the side of the road. So, seeing this guy completely alone was bizarre. And I started to slow down even more. No, I'm not the type to pick up a hitchhiker, especially in the middle of nowhere, but I was curious if he was okay, and what exactly he was doing there. Grant was still awake at this point with me, so we were both looking at this guy. As I got closer, our speed was nearly at a crawl, until we were a few feet from him. Grant then suddenly said, "What the hell?" But I didn't know why, I just kept driving. That wasn't until we got in front of him. I was at a loss for words. The man standing there was the same guy from the hotel in North Carolina. The man that had stabbed at my apple. At least, it looked identical to him. He had on the jeans and flannel shirt, was bald, had a long gray beard. His sunglasses were even sitting on his head still. He was holding what looked like some kind of rake. I was at nearly a crawl trying to look at this guy. Grant was really focused on him too, considering he was the one on his side. He could see him even better than I could. I mentioned that he looked like the guy from the hotel, and Grant quickly said, "Drive. Don't stop. Just drive." The way he said it scared the hell out of me, so I gunned it to the exit and got off the highway. We stopped at some hotel, and I asked him what the hell that was about, trying to see if maybe he saw something I didn't. He asked me again about the guy from the hotel, and I described him, explaining how he looked just like him. The color from his face drained, and he told me that's exactly what the guy looked like at the gas station that we stopped at. I tried to be reasonable there. He definitely looked just like a man from the hotel that Grant did not see, but I also didn't see the attendant at the gas station. Grant had no reason to lie about his description. In fact, he seemed more disturbed by the man on the side of the road than I did, so I can't see him doing all that just to freak me out. We both agreed that it had to be some kind of crazy coincidence, and woke up Cassidy so we could get into the hotel. We got into our room and also explained what happened to Cass, and she agreed that it was bizarre, but otherwise we all kind of just dropped it. The hotel wasn't anything spectacular. We wanted a place to rest and shower, so the quick continental breakfast was welcoming too. We were back on the road and back to enjoying ourselves along the way, talking, laughing, and singing. There was apparently one planned stop close to the border of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, something that Grant specifically wanted to check out. We were kind of torn at that point in our trip. We were contemplating just driving the rest of the way home, or if we should stop again. It would be earlier, so we would have the day to do whatever we wanted, so we agreed to stay. And that way we didn't push ourselves either. So we stopped at a restaurant for an early dinner and looked up some hotels in the area, and made our choice. We would pick a pretty popular looking hotel. The price was decent, and the rooms looked clean. They also had free breakfast and a pool. We tried to keep it cheap, but we also wanted to be able to enjoy ourselves. Anyways, we left the restaurant and headed for the hotel, ready to take a dip or maybe a nap. But once we walked to the front desk, I was immediately in panic mode. Standing behind the desk was the same man from the gas station, from the field, from the last hotel. It was the same bald man with a beard and sunglasses, in a flannel shirt and jeans. He even smiled at us. It was the kind of smile of familiarity, like when you recognize someone. When we all noticed him, we looked at each other as if trying to determine if what we were seeing was real. Again, Cass saw him from the first hotel, so now we had all seen him in multiple places. How was this possible? There was no way he could have been following us. Most of our trip was unplanned, and sometimes we were ahead, sometimes behind. The guy was nice, asking us about a room and making small talk. He asked where we were coming from and where we were going, and I couldn't speak. Grant said we were from Georgia, but just said that we didn't have a destination yet. I could tell that Grant was suspicious too. Cassidy then jumped in and asked if he was from another state, and he laughed and said no, saying he'd lived in Pennsylvania all his life. We checked in, the man thanked us, and we went to our room. Once we were in, we all looked at each other like, what the hell is going on? How did we see the same guy in 4 different places, even working multiple jobs? So no matter what we came up with, none of it made sense. Cass and I were worried that we could have possibly been followed, but Grant didn't seem to agree. I think he was trying to keep us calm more than anything, but he thought it was just a crazy coincidence that we saw these men. I tried to believe that. I tried to let it go and just enjoy the last stretch of our trip, but I was too nervous to even go out and get ice. To our relief, we did not see the man the next morning, or again on our trip. We got home, enjoyed our time there and our trip back with just Grant and I were flannel guy free, but I will never forget him. I will never forget seeing him all those times and just wondering what it all meant. It was late July, and my girlfriend, Teresa, and I were taking a road trip to see some friends on the West Coast. They were getting married, and with the amount of stuff Teresa was going to need to take, it was ultimately going to be cheaper to just drive. So we made our own little road trip out of it. We were both pretty excited about it and hardly slept the night before. We hadn't been able to go on vacation for a few years, so we were ready for some much-needed time away. Because of this, we actually got up pretty early, packed up the car, and went and had breakfast before heading out. As we got further north, the surroundings became more rural and isolated. We were driving on a road surrounded by towering trees and winding areas. It was gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but it was also eerie. The trees made us look so small and insignificant, not to mention the lack of reception on these roads because of it. Still, the experience was worth it. And by the amount of pictures Teresa took, I could tell that she enjoyed it too. The only issue I had was that I was going to need to stop for gas soon. I wasn't expecting to drive through the trees to be that long, otherwise I would have stopped beforehand. Thankfully, it did seem that the state knew this was a long stretch, and we spotted a sign for gas and food coming up. So we continued on, knowing we had a planned stop and we would be in good hands. As we approached where the gas station was supposed to be, we had nearly passed it because of how run down it looked. There was a small building with the siding, or whatever it was, peeling away from the wall. From the small window in the front of the building, it looked dark in there like it wasn't even open. The single pump itself looked ancient, like something straight out of a 1950s movie, complete with a rusty sign and analog numbers on the pump. At first I was concerned that it wouldn't even work, but as I approached it, it had signs of having been recently used. However, the handle seemed to be locked behind some kind of chain and key lock. I looked around, wondering if maybe some kind of attendant had to pump the gas. I wasn't familiar with the area, so I didn't know if that was a thing at the time. After Teresa and I looked around from our car and contemplated if we could make it to another gas station, we heard a gravelly voice say, "Needing gas?" We looked up and saw a man standing next to the building, as if he had just come around from the back or side of the building. He was wearing some very dirty jeans. They had dark patches of dirt all over them, as well as his once white t-shirt. It had spots of dark brown to gold stains on it. In this area, I assumed that he may have been working on some kind of vehicle or similar behind the building. There was nothing weird about it, and it wouldn't surprise me either, so I didn't think anything else of it at the time. I confirmed that we were, and he approached us, wiping his hands on his pants. Getting a better look at him, I'd say he was probably in his late 40s. I watched him as he pulled out a ring of keys and unlocked the pump. He then motioned for me to grab the pump, and I looked at him confused at first. If it was locked up, I assumed that customers couldn't pump it themselves, right? Not that I had a problem doing it, though. He then looked at me and said, "You're a big boy. You can do it yourself, can't you?" I laughed it off and agreed, grabbing the pump to fill up. As it filled, the guy started to make some small talk. It seemed pretty normal at first, asking us where we were coming from and where we were headed. I started telling him about our road trip and started talking about the trees that we were driving through that brought us to where we were currently. You know how when you're talking to someone and you can tell they're not really paying attention to the conversation? Yeah, that was the vibe that I was getting from this guy. Once I realized it, I started being more vague and short in my responses. This also gave me time to look over at Teresa, when I noticed that she seemed to be looking around nervously. I pushed my arm closer to hers to get her attention, but again, I could tell something was wrong. Then the guy asked if there was anyone expecting us where we were going. I thought this was a really strange question. It wasn't asking us why we were going to Portland or what we were going to do there, but instead, if someone was expecting us, or if they knew where we were. It actually kind of kicked me into fight or flight mode, and I told him, yes, that we were actually going to be in a wedding, and that we just got off the phone with someone before we were stopping for gas. I wanted him to know that not only were people expecting us, but they also knew where we were. He looked at me dead in the eyes for several seconds, like he was testing me, testing if I was lying. He then smiled and took over the gas pump, pulling it out and putting it back on the stand, locking it. Within that time, I squeezed Teresa's hand and smiled at her, trying to calm her down. By the way she was biting her lip and looking around, I could tell that something was bothering her. I motioned for her to go ahead and get back in the car, and she did not hesitate. After she was in, the man turned around and looked at me again. I started to thank him, when he just nodded and then said something that has never sat right with me. "You got lucky. This place is usually closed, and people go to the little gas and diner about a mile outside of this place. They usually avoid places like this." It may not have been verbatim because it's been a few years, but basically, I took that as we shouldn't have been there, that we shouldn't have stopped, and you're going to say that you stopped at that diner instead. I just nodded at him and said, yeah, we're gonna go there and get some food and gas. He smiled and said that that was a good idea, and started walking back towards the building. I got in the driver's seat and looked over at him once more and again saw him walking around the back instead of into the building, which was still dark. I started the car, but I apparently could not leave fast enough for Teresa's comfort. We drove away in silence for a few minutes until I asked Teresa what was wrong. She asked me if I saw it too, and I didn't know to what she was referring. She said that she could see further back into the field next to the building. What she saw was a pile of dirt and a black trash bag sitting next to it. And with how dirty the man looked, it started making her freak out. The thing is, her nonverbals really show. I did not see the dirt pile nor the bag as I was keeping the man in my sight, but I was now worried that maybe he was doing something he shouldn't have been. Maybe that's why he was questioning where we were going and who was expecting us. Teresa knows when I'm BSing her too, so there was no way I could lie or play that off as no big deal. So I just told her that it was definitely weird, but that we got out of there okay and we didn't have to worry about it anymore. She started to calm down, but then contemplated if we should tell someone. My initial thought was, who? Were we supposed to find a police station and tell them that the guy that let us get gas may have been burying something suspicious? Would they believe some outsiders, and would they even care? Hell, could they be in on it? As a child, up until I was 17 and moved in with friends, I was living in a very dangerous neighborhood with my mom. I knew when to keep my mouth shut, so I hate to say it, but going to authorities was not the first thing on my mind. My thoughts were just to get the hell out of there and never look back. We kept driving, and just as the man told us, a mile or two out of the trees, there was another gas station with an attached diner. I contemplated stopping, thinking maybe it was best as proof that we went there, but then I worried that maybe the guy could have had someone waiting there for us. Maybe that was the real reason for telling us to go there. Since we had a full tank, I decided to risk it, and we drove right past it. If we stopped again, it was going to be in a heavily populated city. Shortly after passing that gas station, the road turned into a highway, I assume because the speed jumped up to 65 miles per hour. But even as we sped up, there was a van that was quickly catching up to us. It was a dark green van, and the driver looked to be a large man, wearing a hat and sunglasses. I remember this vividly because of how fast he caught up with us. I thought he was going to hit us. But once he did catch up, he just stayed behind us, riding our tail. I thought I would slow down, thinking that he would just pass us, but as I slowed, so did he. Teresa noticed this too and once again started worrying. She asked me if it was the guy from the gas station, and I could at least confirm that it wasn't the same guy. But I couldn't confirm her second suspicion, which was if it was someone following us for that gas station guy. I tried to calm her down as we kept driving for several miles with this car behind us. Finally, we came across a larger city. The signs for food, gas, and hotels were full, so we knew that it had to be a big place. I pulled off the road, and so did the car behind us. I stopped at the first hotel, but we waited in our car as the van pulled in behind us and stopped. Unlike the windshield, the windows were a very dark tint. I couldn't see anything, what they were doing, looking at, nothing. I told Teresa to lay her seat back as if she was going to sleep, and I did the same. I explained why, and after a few minutes, I heard the van drive off. Once it was completely out of sight, I pulled my seat back up, started the car, and drove off. I was not going to be stopping at the hotel that they had stopped at, too. We chose another hotel, one that was on the high end and had visible cameras in the parking lot. We brought anything of value in the room with us, and even ordered room service to avoid having to leave. Yes, I was just as worried as Teresa at that point. After some food, a hot shower, and a good night's rest, we were feeling a lot better. We both agreed that it was weird, but that we were safe. There was no reason for someone to follow us, especially if we didn't do, see, or say anything, so we continued our trip as normal. It also helped that we didn't have any other weird incidents on our drive, and that we refused to stop at any little hole-in-the-wall places. The wedding went great, and on our drive back, we avoided the highway through those trees. It added a little bit of time to the trip, but it was worth it for that peace of mind. Thankfully, the incident didn't last long, even though it felt like forever. But in that moment, it was pretty terrifying. The thought that we were being followed was unreal. But I'm thankful that we remained calm and level-headed, and that it didn't escalate any further. So that, my friends, was a collection of some true scary road trip horror stories. Scary stories on the road, if you will. Out in the car places. The road. Road trip. Yeah. My brain died. I am good. Road trip scary stories. You guys know what this is. I don't really need to tell you what it is. I think the title and probably the thumbnail tell you to some extent what the video is. I have to assume you all have reading comprehension, at least to the extent that you can read road trip horror stories, right? I mean, that almost sounded insulting on my part. Wow, I'm sorry. Huh. I don't mean to be a jerk. That was just stupid of me to say that. That was bad of me to say that. Whatever. I'm over-explaining myself. Hopefully you all enjoyed this collection of road trip horror stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. That would help tremendously. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider hitting that subscribe button. That way you can see all the new stuff that I post. And you can hit the bell icon thingy, the subscribe button and the bell icon, to get notified of all my content. I post at least 3 times a week. Sometimes more. Usually more, to be honest with you. 3 times is the minimum of number of times I post during the week. July is going to be a very content-heavy month, so if you want to get notified of all that, be there for July. Get the bell icon after you hit the subscribe button. And also then hit the like button on this video. I just want all the buttons to light up, that's why I'm doing that. Yeah, just, gonna be a good month. Good, crazy busy month, so. You can also join Patreon and memberships to get early access to content like this and other content, depending on what you want to sign up for. The Patreon is a link down in the description. The membership is the join button down below the video. You can also do a super thanks with that big thanks button, and send a tip to the channel. Never expected, always appreciated. And yeah. Hope you're all having a beautiful weekend. Hope I see you again here very soon, but of course, until then, my friends, remember you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, and until next time, much love, and sleep well.